Hi, this is Mary, and this is the walkthrough for problem set 8 on emulsions and foams. So our equation of the week this week tells us the elasticity of an emulsion when the volume fraction of the dispersed phase gets so high that it starts to behave like a solid. So remember last week we said that the viscosity of an emulsion really starts to rise when the volume fraction gets above 50%. When it gets all the way up to 0.64 or higher, it actually starts to behave like a solid instead. So we've got a couple of problems this week that help you practice using this equation, as well as sort of an updated project proposal we'll talk about later. So our first question this week focuses on chocolate souffles, which are an excellent example of a foam and also very famous for being difficult to make. So the object here is to get souffles that rise well above the borders of the ramekin that they're cooked in, and that's due to expansion of air bubbles that were already present in the mixture to begin with. Those air bubbles come from a foam that's made out of egg whites, and it has sort of flavoring folded into it from a souffle base. And those bubbles expand due to an increase in temperature as well as to evaporation of new steam. This recipe introduces a lot of air bubbles into the egg whites by whipping them, and the goal is to keep those air bubbles in place long enough that they can help the souffle rise. So you don't want the air bubbles to coalesce or to rise out of the batter before it has a chance to solidify. So the first few parts will ask you what the role of the lemon juice, the unfolded proteins that come from the egg white, and the sugar are in helping this foam be more stable. The next two parts of this question will help you understand what's happening to the souffle as it rises. Unfortunately, we didn't bring in a microscope this week to check exactly how the bubble's radius changes, but we'll help you make an approximation based on how much we saw the souffle inflate in class. Then you'll use that to figure out how the elastic modulus of the souffle changes. And finally, you'll take a look at the souffle base and try to figure out how those ingredients might be affecting the stability of the souffle. The next problem is all about Hollandaise sauce. This is that sort of yellowish goop that's on your eggs Benedict. It's also served over fish and vegetables. And it's a really great recipe, I think, because it combines a lot of things you've already learned about viscosity and heat transfer, as well as reviewing what's happening in emulsions, because Hollandaise sauce is a butter and water emulsion. The basic idea behind this recipe is that you're going to add yolks along with some water and lemon juice to a saucepan and heat that up until the mixture is kind of viscous, but it's not so hot that the yolks have coagulated yet. And then you're going to add in butter. So this creates the emulsion, right? Adding butter to that water base. And you do that until it reaches the consistency that you want, and then you serve it. We've gotten to that point in the semester where you've learned so many different things that you can start to understand why each of the instructions in the recipe calls for the techniques that it does. So these first few questions are just asking you why the recipe would ask a cook at home to use these different methods. How does that contribute to the texture that you're trying to achieve? But of course, we also want you to think about this recipe quantitatively as well. And in particular, we want to point out that all along we've been saying there's this energy associated with breaking fat or oil up into droplets in water. And we haven't told you how big that energy is. Is it enough to power a light bulb? Is it just something on the order of kBt, which is thermal energy? How big is it? So these first four parts will help you figure out how big that energy is, how much is required to emulsify the butter when you make Hollandaise. The next parts of this question will help you calculate the elasticity of the emulsion. So you might think of Hollandaise as something that is pretty liquid when it's warm, but it does also behave a little bit like a solid once it's very cool. So you're going to calculate the elasticity of the emulsion. And finally, you're going to take a look at the recipe and see how you could actually make that emulsion much stiffer just by making changes in the kitchen. So to do that as inspiration, we suggest that you use the equation of the week. So the final problem on this set is your updated project proposal. We really hope that you're meeting with the instructors, with Harold McGee, and with your teaching fellows to discuss what they think might work in your project and what you really need to review. And so sometimes they have harsh news to give. They might think that something won't work and you might not be convinced, but we hope that you give it some ample consideration, and that often causes major changes in the proposal between 1 week and the next. And so in addition to thinking about how you might change your project for those reasons, we also need to start knowing more specifics, like what kind of food you're going to need, what kind of equipment you need to reserve, so that we can stock everything that you need, and your teaching fellows can manage that between groups. So please do submit this updated final project proposal. Again, we just need one per group, and upload that to the Dropbox on the course iSite.